We've all experienced stress at some point or another in our lives, and sometimes that is a good thing and sometimes that's not such a good thing. In today's video, I'm going to talk about my relationship with stress, how it has shown up in my life, how it has impacted not just my health, but my relationships and my work, and what I have been doing over the last 5 years to combat the effects of stress on my life. If you have a love-hate relationship with stress, then this video is for you. Also, I will be over the next several weeks be talking about how stress manifests itself in people's lives and particularly at work, and how to combat it and how to overcome some of the impacts. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and make sure you hit the bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. Over the last 14 years, I have been dealing with an autoimmune disease called lupus. Now, lupus is a condition where your white blood cells, which are normally there to fight off infections and bacteria inside your body, start attacking your body, so the healthy blood cells and the healthy organs inside your body. Stress for me has been one of the biggest triggers of a lupus flare, and when I get lupus flares, I'm basically out for the count. I am tired all the time. I have flu-like symptoms or feelings of having the flu without really any of the other symptoms to go with it. I will be talking a little bit more about that. But first, let's just talk a little bit about what exactly stress is. So stress is really your body's reaction and your body's response to something that's overwhelming or something that's foreign inside your system. So what happens is when you have this triggering event, your body produces a hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol is actually required by your body to fight off inflammation and to regulate the blood sugar in your system. It's required to regulate metabolism. But what happens is that when you're in this triggering moment, the cortisol levels rise, and then once the moment passes, the levels go back to being at their normal levels. The issue comes is when you're constantly in a state of stress, that cortisol level, those hormone levels, are not able to reduce and come down. And when those hormone levels stay elevated for so long, it starts to wreak havoc on your system. Things like heart disease and anxiety and depression and weakened immune system and weight gain. All of this stuff happens as a result of being in a constant state of stress. Now, when you're in a job that requires you to be stressed all the time, or where you are stressed all the time, those hormone levels never get a chance to go down. And you don't see the changes right away. Like in the beginning, it's all exciting and you feel this rush, and you're busy and you feel wanted and you feel productive because you're checking off all these things, and there's this buzz and excitement around. But slowly that starts to wear down your body, and you'll notice things like you start getting sick more often, you have a cold more often, you feel more run down, you get tired easily, but you can't sleep because you have all this stuff that you have to do. This is exactly what I experienced over the course of, I would say, 2 years, and it took me a really long time to learn what exactly stress was doing to my body. I was never an active kid growing up. I always preferred indoors and books to really going out there and doing any kind of sports or activity of any kind. And I grew up in the desert in Dubai, which, outdoor activities in Dubai were basically going wadi bashing or going for a picnic by the beach. It wasn't really a very outdoorsy type of environment. And so when I came to Canada, when I turned 18, I came here for university after I got married. This was a shock to me because everybody in North America is very active, and I thrived in that environment for a long time. Like we would party hard and we would work hard and we would rest hard. Like it was all a wonderful balance. And then things started going downhill slowly. I had my first baby, and very soon after, about a year after I came back from maternity leave, I got my first HR job. I had worked for 8 long years to finally land my first HR job, and I was determined to be the best HR person my boss or anyone in the company had ever met. Looking back, I'm laughing now, but at the time I was very serious. So where everyone else, all the other HR professionals would book like 1 or 2 interviews a day, I would book 5 or 6. Where they would book, they would leave lots of blank space in their calendars, I would have back-to-back meetings from 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock every single day. Where they would book 1 site visit a day, I would book 4, and I would walk to every single site across downtown Toronto in heels, because God knows I couldn't look frumpy or shabby. I would take the subway from downtown Toronto back home, which would be like an hour and a half long ride, because I wanted to save money. And then I would come home and I would run around after the toddler, and I would take care of stuff at home, and I would take care of cleaning and all of the other stuff that goes with managing a house. And my husband and I still continued to have a very active social life even afterwards. So we would be entertaining and we would go out places. Needless to say, 4 weeks after I started my first HR job, I developed a fever. And I had no other symptoms. I just had a fever, and my fever wouldn't go down. The fever would go down when I would take a Tylenol, but it would come right back up again. I refused to take any sick days because I had just started my job. And what kind of person takes sick days like a month after they start their jobs? For 6 whole weeks, I struggled, and I went to work with a mid-grade fever 24/7. And I didn't stop during that entire time. I took on projects, I took on everything that I possibly could, and I pretended like everything was okay. Internally, I knew that there was something going on, but I didn't want to face it because I was so busy. I had no time. And finally, you could see the physical manifestations of that constant fever in my body. I lost weight. I went down to about 95 pounds. Over 1 weekend, I lost 5 pounds. I started losing hair, and my skin got sallow. I started getting all these rashes across my body. My doctor would put me on antibiotics, but nothing was working. Finally, after 6 weeks of struggling with this daily nonstop fever, I finally got my doctor to do some blood tests, and the blood test showed that my blood counts were dangerously low. He told me to admit myself into hospital. They ran a whole gamut of tests. They tested me for everything from cancer to like every possible thing that you could imagine, and everything came back negative. They had no idea what was wrong with me. After 2 weeks of, forced rest, my blood levels started to come back. I started to gain weight. They released me from the hospital, and I bounced back pretty quickly. 3 months after I was released from the hospital, I was back at work, rearing to go. And, obviously, because I had had all that rest, my hair started growing back, and I started gaining weight, and I felt healthier, and I wasn't tired anymore. There was no signs of fever. And so, I started to go back to the way things were. Human beings they have short-term memories, right? So when I was in the depths of my illness, I promised myself I would take it easy and I would take care of myself, and I would told my husband the same thing. Except then when I started getting better, I thought, hey, I'm strong again. And they never really did diagnose me with anything, so it was probably just a fluke. And so, life went back to the way it was right before. And on top of that, I added school to the mix, and I was going down to U of T 2 nights a week to do a course that I felt was vitally important in my life at the time. Of course, needless to say, by the time April rolled around and final exams were on top of me for school, I developed a fever again. And I fell sick again. And during that time, I got pregnant and I miscarried my baby. And I knew then that it was time for me to take a rest and take some time away from work. I just couldn't physically go into work anymore. And it didn't end there though, because I continued to believe that I could still push through whatever was going on. The doctors still weren't able to tell me what exactly it was. Finally, in September of that year, I had a seizure and the ambulance had to take me away and admit me into the hospital again. And it wasn't until that time that they finally said, oh, you have all indicators of lupus, which is the autoimmune disease that I talked about earlier. The doctors also told me that stress was a major contributor to lupus and for lupus to flare. And I always have considered myself like a low-key, non-stress person. What I didn't realize is that stress manifests itself in many different ways. It looks different for many people. And so it wasn't until then, 2 years later, when I finally realized that for the sake of my health, for the sake of my son, for the sake of my family, and for everyone else around me, I had to make some changes. And so over the course of the next 10 months while I was home, I made some significant changes to my lifestyle. I cut out all extracurricular activities from mine and my son's life. I realized that staying with him, being present with him, as opposed to trying to rush him around all over the place for different activities when he was 3, was really not the most important thing. The most important thing was actually being present with him as a mother. I realized that procrastination was a big issue for me, and that when I procrastinated, I got stressed. And while I worked really well under pressure, that stress was also literally eating me alive. And so I found ways to combat my procrastination issue. I still struggle with it to this date, but there are lots of things, there are systems that I've put into place that have helped me with that. I started enlisting people for help. I am a hugely independent person and I have a lot of trouble asking for help. And I realized that I couldn't do it on my own. It's just impossible. And I needed to ask people for help. I had this limiting belief too that in order to be successful, in order to be good at something, you had to work at it 24/7, and that stress was a part of the job. The more responsibilities you had, like that was just a way of life. It had to be that way. And then I started researching and studying, really successful people who didn't struggle with stress, who were fine. And I found that there were 2 key things that they did. Number 1, they enlisted help. They relied on a team of people, both personally and professionally, to help them achieve their goals. And number 2, they had airtight processes and structures that they had put into place to help ease their lives. They had habits and systems and processes and ways of doing things that would make things more efficient and easier, as opposed to working at something longer. So let's go through those 2 things in a little bit more detail. So systems and processes are really there to help you make things easier. They're there to systematize things so that you don't have to think about them as you're doing them. And it's the same thing as, having habits in place. There are all sorts of books and articles and resources that have been written around the benefits of developing processes and systems and structures and habits. The best one probably was that I have read. It's a fairly recent book. It's by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits. I'll link to it in the description below. He talks about habits, but really he's talking about systems and processes. And the more automated you can make something, the less you have to think about it, the less your brain is exercising, and the less opportunity for stress to take hold. The other aspect of this is having a team in place. Now, when I was diagnosed with lupus, I didn't have a team at work, and so I didn't really have an opportunity to delegate anything. However, I did have a whole bunch of other people at work. I had my colleagues, I had friends, I had a husband, I had an extended family, I had my boss even. All of those people were impacted by my illness, and every single one of those people wanted to do everything they possibly could to ensure that I didn't go back to that place again. So seek out your team. Find people who align with your values, who you respect, and who see you asking for help not as a trait of weakness, but as something that signifies strength. So that's it. I just wanted to share my story, and I wanted to share how I have combated my experience with stress and what I have put into place to combat that. And now I help leaders who are most prone to those stress-related diseases and illnesses to help combat that stress and put mechanisms and things in place that will ensure that they're able to harness the stress for good and stop it before it starts wreaking havoc on their minds and their bodies. If you'd like to learn more about my process and how I help people do that, then the link to contact me is below. I am the person maybe that you need to reach out to in your life. And if I can do anything to make your stress life a little bit better, then I would be more than happy to do that. Now, if you could do me one favor, if you found this video useful and if you think that any of the information was helpful for you, please hit the like button and make sure you subscribe, because I have a few more videos in the same vein of helping you combat stress and overwork and live and have a career where you are actually thriving. Now I want to hear from you. How have you dealt with stress in your life? What do you do to help combat stress? What do you do to release that and to reduce those cortisol levels in your system? Comment below and let me know. Also, I wanted to also bring to your attention that May is Lupus Awareness Month, and over the course of the month, I'm going to be sharing some insights around my journey with lupus, and how I have dealt with it, and also how to combat some of the triggers that cause lupus flares. So just note, I am not a medical doctor. I don't have any medical training in this. This is purely from my own experience, and I hope that you get some value out of it. So come back same place, same time next week for another video on stress and overwork and burnout and all of that.